This is a three-part response to the two-part video I did on materialism. The first node of materialism that I identified was that everything that exists is material and matter is properly basic. Alright, let's start from there. There's no way that the absence of anything could give rise to something. But to be something is to be actual in some way. It might be useful here to recall the paradox of being and change raised by Heraclides and Parmenides, addressed by Plato but explained by Aristotle. Parmenides noted that there is an infinite distance between existence and non-existence. This is a self-evident truth. If there was nothing, no actual being could ever come from it. So being is properly basic. But, continues Parmenides, being is permanent precisely because it's actual. But if being undergoes change, then it stops being actual. Our senses tell us that the world is undergoing change, losing and acquiring being, moving back and forth between existence and non-existence, which is impossible, since that would entail nothing acting upon something. Therefore, change, according to Parmenides, must be an illusion. Our senses must be deceiving us, because being itself is one, pure, actuality, and absolutely indivisible. Moreover, if being is one, then even distinction or individuation is impossible. So pure being exists, and change can't really happen. For change to happen, nothing would have to act on something, which is impossible. Heraclides says, on the contrary, that change is all there is to reality. Nothing stays the same. Nothing is actual, but rather everything is potentially this or potentially that. Consequently, you can't even step into the same river twice, because everything has changed. For that matter, he said, by the time you finish the sentence, it's not even the same sentence, because nothing can be the same, since everything is in flux. Obviously, these are two diametrically opposed metaphysics, and neither one is remotely plausible. But we should not laugh at these men, but try to figure out where they went wrong. It won't be any help to point to scientific descriptions of the mechanisms of change for continuity, because what these men called into dispute is the very ontological ground in which these details are intelligible. So we must give a response that deals with the metaphysical. It's true that being implies some kind of permanence of identity. It's true that change is a pervasive element of reality. How can we resolve this paradox? If we want to be Philistines, we can, of course, dismiss it with a scoff about stupid philosophy and go back to eating our cheeseburgers and sipping Coca-Cola. However, if we are to be reasonable people, we must recognize that there is a problem to be solved. Thankfully, Aristotle solved it for us, and his solution will be the starting point for this presentation. This part of the presentation corresponds to the first node of materialism, as I said. You can look at any outline listed in the detail box if you're not sure where you are. Okay, actuality and potentiality. Aristotle notes that any material being of our experience exists in two modalities, actual and potential. Let's take an artificial being first. A given chair is actually a chair, inasmuch as it continues to instantiate the essence of chairness. Let us say that a chair, by common definition, is an item of furniture, which consists of a raised surface upon which to sit. Any particular chair, whether big, small, wooden or metal, barstool or beanbag, meets this definition. We can make this definition more precise if we wanted to zero in on a particular species of chair, but let's keep it general for now. Now, in what sense is a chair in act, that is to say, actually a chair? Precisely in this sense, that matter continues to instantiate it as a chair, and in this case, since we're talking about an artifact, as long as it's still understood by some mind to correspond to chairness. Even though all the matter is undergoing change, what's relevant to a chair being actually a chair is its correspondence to a particular form, which in this case, since chairs are artificial, is contained in the mind of the chair maker and in everyone else who understands what that particular arrangement of matter is about and for. However, were someone to burn it to ashes, it would no longer be in act as a chair, but rather as ashes. This brings us to the potentiality or potency of a being. To the extent that a being can undergo change, it is in potency. The chair is actually a raised surface for sitting. It is potentially a pile of wood chips or ashes. Any being which is not pure actuality will have some degree of potentiality, that is, the capacity to undergo change. But change is not, as Parmenides thought, the passage from absolute being to absolute non-being, but rather the passage from one limited actuality to another limited actuality. When a chair goes out of existence as a chair, it acquires another actuality, another form or forms, in this case, ashes. Scatter those ashes in your garden and eventually another change entirely will occur, as the soil captures the chemical properties of the ashes, and so ashes become soil, and so on and so on. But at every stage of the game, it's not a question of nothing acting to change something, but one being, which is actually this but potentially that, being acted upon by another actual being, which is actually this and potentially that. What is actual and determinate about a being is its essence or form. What is transient or potential is its matter. But here's the really important thing. Every instance of material form, every substance along the way, is itself both actually this and potentially that. That is to say, it is form and matter. From this we can make a further distinction between prime matter and secondary matter. Prime matter is not some substance that we can ever encounter, but rather it is the modality of all material substances by virtue of which their matter is fundamentally indeterminate unless actualized by some form. By contrast, all material substances that we ever encounter are secondary matter, matter which is in act or informed as this substance or that substance. So Parmenides' error consisted in moving directly from the rational intuition of being to the idea of pure being, pure act, which cannot undergo change or be divided into parts. Heraclides' error is more obvious. In order for any change to take place, there must first be something to undergo change. Or, in order for a being to be potentially that, it must first be actually this. It is intelligible when I say, the dog changed into a corpse, or the corpse changed into soil, but it is simply meaningless to say that change changed into change. At every stage of the game of change, there must be some specific actuality to undergo the change, and it necessarily must be distinct from the agent which acts to change it. To put this all in another way, Parmenides saw the distinction between being and non-being, but moved directly to pure act, pure being. But even though pure act is metaphysically possible, it is not necessary that all instances of being are instances of pure being. Heraclides saw the pervasiveness of change and concluded from it that existence is pure potentiality. But pure potentiality, or prime matter, cannot exist on its own. If so, it would simply be nothing. In order for potentiality to exist as a substance, it must be activated. What this demonstrates is that act is ontologically prior to potency. The latter depends on the former. Now the mode in which something is actual is its form, or formal cause. The mode in which something is potential is its matter, or material cause. If you watch my second video on materialism, you'll see how this corresponds to the four causes of any being. For now, let us simply take note of what all this tells us about matter. Namely, that any material being is a radically contingent being, and not an ontologically necessary being. To encounter any rock, tree, star, particle, book, piano, dolphin, or human being is to encounter a being whose existence is distinct from his essence. Such a being is one which might not have been. Thus we can easily conceive of existence without that being. Each of us has entertained thoughts like the following. Suppose my parents had never met, or suppose the Nazis had won, or what would happen if an enormous asteroid hit the Earth? Questions like this are perfectly rational. They're not like asking, suppose 1 and 3 did not add up to 4. Since the latter question involves attempting to call into doubt what is necessarily true, while the former questions are all about beings which might have been but do not have to be. But if, as materialism claims, matter is properly basic, then material beings ought to be necessary and not contingent. Matter ought to be properly actual, but as we've already seen, to be material is to be potential, to be subject to change, to be subject to going in or out of existence. Matter cannot therefore be ontologically basic in this way. It just doesn't have what it takes to ground reality. Material beings are too transient, ephemeral, temporal to be the ground of existence. Indeed, the further down we go in the chain of material beings, the more ephemeral, transient, and indeterminate matter becomes. So this brings us back to the first major note of materialism, which was the claim that matter is the properly basic constituent of reality. Well, no it isn't. The second part of the first note of materialism was the claim that everything that is real or that we encounter is essentially material. Since this relates to the second note of materialism, its erroneous view of subjectivity and objectivity, but also to nominalism and monism, I will address it in passing in the next video and then again in greater detail in part 3.